This is the first of a multi-part series about the first Christmas. This video examines the question of whether the first Christmas happened on December 25th. Celebrating Christmas on December 25th has become so popular that even countries with almost no Christians celebrate it. Here is a photo of a Christmas tree in Japan. But are we sure that Jesus was born on December 25th? Maybe not. Some people are surprised to learn that historians, even Bible-believing conservative Christian historians, have some pretty serious problems with the idea that Jesus Christ was born on December 25th, 1 BC, or December 25th, 1 AD. Various scholars have suggested many different years, such as 7 BC, 6 BC, 4 BC, 2 BC, 1 BC, or even as late as 6 or 7 AD. Scholars have suggested many different calendar dates, such as January 6th, March 21st, April 20th, May 20th, and November 17th. By the way, there is no year zero. We explain why in a later video in this series. Before we get started, the first thing we need to ask ourselves is whether this is a realistic expectation. Is it reasonable to expect modern historians to be able to determine the birthday of someone who was born over 2,000 years ago? Is it historically possible to do that? As a matter of fact, this is a reasonable question, because history does report the birthdays of some famous people who were born over 2,000 years ago. There are many examples. A partial list includes Julius Caesar, Augustus Caesar, and Alexander the Great. Christians believe that Jesus' birthday is infinitely more important than the birthday of anyone else who has ever lived. So it is certainly reasonable for us to ask when Jesus was born. Furthermore, the Gospels of Matthew and Luke provide detailed reports of Jesus' birthday. 26 verses in the Gospel of Matthew are devoted to describing events describing the birth of Jesus, and Luke gives 114 verses to describing Jesus' conception, birth, and infancy. 10 of Luke's verses quote Mary word for word. If these reports are accurate, they provide lots of useful detail. These Gospels also report that many eyewitnesses saw the infant Christ, and that there was an extremely large number of people who knew about Christ's birth shortly after it occurred, although they did not actually see the newborn Jesus. Both Gospels correlate Christ's birth with the time of major secular historical events, and Matthew even reports that a rare and spectacular astronomical event occurred on Christ's birthday. This spectacular astronomical event, the Star of Bethlehem, was even visible for several months after Jesus was born. If if Matthew and Luke are accurate, it should be quite easy to determine a very close approximation of the birth of Christ. Let's start with the eyewitnesses. Jesus' mother Mary certainly would have known when he was born, and the Bible says that she had many opportunities to tell the apostles about Jesus' birthday. The Bible says that she was with Jesus when he was with his disciples in Capernaum, and that the Apostle John took her into his own home after the crucifixion. The Bible also says that she was even with the disciples after Jesus' resurrection and ascension. Jesus' father Joseph certainly would have been an eyewitness, and the Gospel of Luke says that shepherds saw the newborn Jesus. Matthew's Gospel says that wise men saw Jesus and brought gifts to him. Luke reports that a man named Simeon gave a very nice speech when Jesus was circumcised, and so did a lady named Anna. The Gospel of Matthew also says that there are many people who knew about Jesus' birth shortly after it happened while Jesus was still in Bethlehem, although for some unexplained reason they did not actually try to go to see him. The most famous was King Herod. But it was not just Herod. Matthew claims that all Jerusalem was troubled when they heard about the new king, Jesus, being born in Bethlehem. But strangely, nobody except the wise men tried to go see the newborn Christ, the Messiah, in Bethlehem. There were thousands of people living in Jerusalem, and if Matthew is right, all, I repeat, all of them knew about the birth of Christ, the Messiah, shortly after it happened because Matthew said so. This is discussed in detail in a later video in this series. If I finish that video, there should be a link to it popping up on your screen right about now. The Bible provides even more details that should be helpful to historians who want to determine the date of Jesus' birth. For example, the Bible reports 3 major historical events that happened about the same time that Jesus Christ was born. The first was a census conducted by Quirinius, also called Cyrenius, the governor of Syria. This is discussed in detail in a later video in this series. If I finish that video, there will be a link to it appearing on your screen right about now. Another historical event that is reported that correlates with the birth of Jesus is the death of Herod the Great. Although the date of Herod's death is not actually reported in the Bible, the Gospels of Matthew and Luke both report that Herod was king of Judea when Jesus Christ was born. The date of Herod's death is known to be 4 BC because it is documented in other ancient writings. So we can be sure that Jesus was born no later than 4 BC if Matthew and Luke are accurate. The third historical event is the massacre of the male children and babies in Bethlehem, reported in Matthew chapter 2. Christian theologians call this the slaughter of the innocents, and it is discussed in detail in a later video in this series. If I have finished this video, there will be a link, and so forth. That brings us to the last and possibly the most famous event that happened when Jesus was born. The Gospel of Matthew reports this rare and spectacular astronomical event, the Star of Bethlehem, and even says that it continued for a long time afterwards, long enough for the wise men to see it and travel the long journey from their homes in the east to Bethlehem. The Star of Bethlehem would have been seen by millions of people. The Star of Bethlehem will be discussed in detail in a later video in this series. If I finish the video about the Star of Bethlehem, a link to it will be popping up on your screen right about now, or you can go to my YouTube channel's homepage and find it. With all this evidence, it should be easy for Christian historians to reach a consensus approximation, if not an exact date, for the birthday of Jesus Christ. The Bible says that lots of people either saw baby Jesus or knew about him, that several historically verifiable events happened about the same time as his birth. But modern Christian historians have not been able to determine the date of Jesus Christ's birth. It's actually worse than that. It's not just modern Christians. Ancient Christians did not know when Jesus Christ was born either. For example, St. Clement of Alexandria, who lived less than 200 years after the birth of Christ, from about 150 to about 215 AD, wrote that some Christians believed that Jesus was born on March 21st. Others thought it was April 19th or 20th. Other Christians believed that he was born on May 20th, and other Christians believed that Jesus was born on November 17th. There is simply no evidence that 1st, 2nd, or 3rd century Christians agreed with each other on any date for Jesus' birth. All of this evidence simply falls apart when we try to use it to figure out a date for Jesus' birth. So why do we celebrate Jesus' birthday on December 25th? What is so special about that date? There are 3 theories about why Christians celebrate Christmas on December 25th. The first theory is that Jesus was conceived on the same day and month that he would later die, March 25th. The second theory is that Jesus was conceived 6 months after his cousin, John the Baptist, who was conceived on September 25th. The third theory is that early Christians borrowed pagan holidays, which occurred in late December. Each one of these theories has major problems. For example, theory number 1 claims that Jesus was conceived on the same day and month, but obviously not the year, that he would later be crucified, which was assumed to be March 25th. Then you simply add 9 months to this and you get the date of Jesus' birth. This claim is supported by the writings of several ancient Christians, such as Irenaeus, Tertullian, and Augustine, and by the fact that the Feast of the Annunciation is known to have been celebrated on March 25th by ancient Christians. Let me digress for just a few seconds for viewers who are not familiar with the term Annunciation. For those of you who, like me, grew up in churches who didn't celebrate it, the Annunciation was when some Christian denominations, such as Roman Catholicism, believed that an angel told Mary and Joseph that Mary would become pregnant with Jesus. The Annunciation supposedly occurred on March 25th, although the Bible itself does not actually say when it happened. Now back to theory number one. The fatal flaw with theory number one is that it is entirely based on assumptions that are completely unsubstantiated by any evidence. There's no reason why Jesus would have to be conceived and die on the same calendar day. Nobody knows when Jesus died. Nobody knows when the Annunciation happened. And Mary would have to have been pregnant for precisely 275 days. That's the number of days between March 25th and December 25th for the calculation to work. Theory number one simply falls apart. So let's move on to theory number two. Theory number two is based on Luke chapter 1 verse 36, which says that Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, was 6 months pregnant when Jesus was conceived. Now, if we could just figure out when when Elizabeth got pregnant, we could simply add 15 months to that and get Jesus' birthday. Some people believe that Elizabeth became pregnant on September the 25th. There's really no evidence for that date. So why do they believe that John the Baptist was conceived on September 25th? Well, it's a tradition. According to Christian tradition, John the Baptist was born on June 25th, which is obviously exactly 6 months before December 25th. This is a very old tradition, and the Feast of the Nativity of John the Baptist was celebrated on June 24th or June 25th in ancient times. If you simply subtract 9 months from June 25th, you get September 25th. The problem with this is that there is no evidence that John the Baptist was born on June 25th. Also, this belief may be based on circular reasoning from Luke chapter 1 verse 36, which we have already discussed. Personally, I find it a bit strange that John the Baptist's parents would remember the date when he was conceived. But be that as it may, is there another way to calculate when John the Baptist was conceived without relying on unsubstantiated traditions? Some Christians believe that the Bible does provide a way to do so with exact precision. This gets complicated, so please stay with me for a minute. Some Christians believe that it is possible to calculate the date that John the Baptist was conceived based on 5 Bible passages. First, the Gospel of Luke says that Elizabeth's husband, Zacharias, was a priest in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. Second, the Old Testament book called First Chronicles says that priests served on the temple in a rotating schedule. Third, Luke says that Zacharias was in the Abiah or Abijah group of priests. Fourth, Luke says that Zacharias was serving in the temple when an angel told him that Elizabeth would get pregnant. And last but not least, Luke says that Elizabeth conceived John the Baptist after Zacharias finished his priestly rotation. You may want to freeze this video for a few seconds to go over all this, but don't spend too much time on it because you will soon see that his method is fatally flawed. If we can figure out when Zacharias finished serving at the temple, we can calculate the month and day of Jesus' birth. At least that's what they say. It turns out that there really was a 19th century theologian named Joseph Heinrich Friedlieb who started at the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in September 70 AD and traced the priestly rotating schedules backwards to the 1st century BC. Mr. Friedlieb claimed that his calculations proved that Zacharias' priestly rotation ended on September 25th, 2 BC. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about his calculations because he based all of his mathematics on unproven or even false assumptions. It does make an interesting read. You can Google it if you want to. But what are Mr. Friedlieb's assumptions? Well, they're numerous. Friedlieb assumed that John was conceived in 2 BC. But as we shall see in the other videos of this series, there's a lot of uncertainty about the year of Jesus' birth. So ancient Jews used a calendar that was based on lunar months, with extra months added occasionally as needed. What this means is you have to know the year on the Jewish calendar to know the month and day on the Roman calendar, which is the calendar that we use. Friedlieb also assumed that Elizabeth conceived immediately after Zacharias finished his priestly service, but the Gospel of Luke just says after. It could have been months later. Lastly, Friedlieb assumed that Mary conceived Jesus when Elizabeth was precisely 6 months pregnant, but Luke only says that Elizabeth was in her 6th month. She could have been anywhere in a 30-day range because of the simple fact that months are about 30 days long. So, in spite of all of his mathematical efforts, theory number 2 just falls apart. That brings us to theory number 3. Theory number 3 says that early Christians borrowed pagan holidays, which occurred in late December, and recycled them into a Christian holiday. What are the facts that support this theory? Well, we know that the winter solstice occurs on December 21st in the northern hemisphere. We also know that many ancient pagan religions had celebrations on or near December 21st. There's an enormous amount of historical and archaeological evidence for this. Many pagan winter solstice holidays predate Christianity by hundreds or even thousands of years. For example, parts of Stonehenge, which was built over 4,000 years ago, align with the position of the rising sun at the winter solstice. Another example is the Egyptian temple at Karnak, which was built about 4,000 years ago. It is aligned with the position of the rising sun at the winter solstice. We also know that many pagan gods celebrated birthdays and or feast days on or near the winter solstice. This includes Mithra, Sol Invictus, Marduk, Horus, Saturn, Dionysus, whom the Romans called Bacchus, and many, many others. We also know that many Christian beliefs are similar to pagan beliefs that are much older than Christianity. Here is just one example. On the left is a photo of a 2nd century mosaic of Apollo, the sun god, showing 7 rays of light surrounding his head. On the right is a photo of a mosaic of Jesus, the Son of God, also showing 7 rays of light surrounding his head. By the way, the mosaic of Jesus is actually in the Vatican in Rome. We also know that the Roman Emperor Aurelian made December 21st, the birthday of the unconquered sun, an official Roman holiday in 274 AD. The phrase Sol Invictus was Latin for unconquered sun. It is well known that Constantine, the first Christian Roman emperor, was also a big fan of Sol Invictus. You can actually own a piece of archaeological proof of this important idea if you want to. There are literally thousands of ancient Roman coins containing an image of Constantine on the front and Sol Invictus on the back. You can buy one for yourself for about the price of a dinner for 2 at a nice restaurant. Just go to eBay and search on Constantine Sol coin without quotes and buy yourself a piece of history. So the evidence for theory number 3, that Christians borrowed pagan holidays which occurred in late December and recycled them into Christmas, look pretty strong. There's one problem, however. The claim that Christianity borrowed beliefs and practices from paganism contradicts the beliefs of many Christians who believe that Christianity is based on divine revelation. So there are 3 theories about why we celebrate Christmas on December 25th. That Jesus was conceived on the same day and month that he would later die, that Jesus was conceived precisely 6 months after John the Baptist, or that early Christians borrowed pagan holidays which occurred in late December. I hope this video has given you enough information to make a well-informed decision. For more interesting videos, please visit our website, freethinkersbooks.com.